The worst part wasn't finding the deed. It was the handwriting on the back of it. My daughter's handwriting. 3 words in blue pen, the kind she always used because she said black ink looked too final. Mom doesn't know. I was 67 years old when I found that piece of paper, folded twice and tucked inside an old tax return from 2008. My husband had been dead 9 months. I was finally going through the filing cabinet in his office because the accountant said I had to, and because the smell of his aftershave was finally starting to fade from the cardigan I'd been keeping in the bottom drawer. His name was Howard. We'd been married 43 years. We met at a wedding in Asheville where neither of us knew the bride or the groom very well, and we ended up at the same back table eating cake that was too sweet and complaining about the band. He told me later he'd noticed me because I laughed with my whole body. I told him later I'd noticed him because he was the only man at the table who didn't try to refill my wine glass without asking. We had 3 children. Anson, the oldest, who became a real estate attorney in Charlotte. Then Tessa, who taught 3rd grade in the same elementary school I taught at for 31 years. Then little Wesley, our surprise, who came 9 years after Tessa and was now 32 and living in Denver doing something with software that none of us really understood. I'm telling you all this because I want you to know I wasn't some neglectful mother. I wasn't some absent wife. I made breakfast every single morning of my marriage. I drove to every recital, every game, every parent-teacher conference. When Howard's mother got sick in 1994, I quit my summer job at the library so I could drive her to chemotherapy 3 times a week for 8 months. When Anson got divorced in 2015, I had him living in our spare bedroom for 14 months and never once asked him to contribute to groceries. When Tessa's first miscarriage broke her, I slept in her guest room for 2 weeks and held her hand at night when she couldn't stop crying. So when I tell you what happened, I need you to understand that I was not the kind of woman who deserved it. Not that anyone deserves it, but I want you to know. The morning I found the deed, I was making coffee in the percolator Howard insisted on keeping even after I bought him a Keurig in 2019. He never opened the Keurig box. It was still in the pantry the day he died. The percolator was burbling on the stove, and I was eating a piece of dry toast because I hadn't been able to taste anything properly since the funeral. The filing cabinet was in his office, which used to be Anson's bedroom before Anson left for Chapel Hill in 1981. Howard had taken it over and lined the walls with bookshelves and put his diplomas up, and that was where he did his crossword puzzles every Sunday morning for 40 years. I started with the top drawer because that's where I assumed the important things would be. Insurance papers, car titles, the deed to the house. But it wasn't there. None of it was there. The top drawer was full of Howard's hobbies. Old fly fishing magazines, instruction manuals for tools he'd bought from estate sales, brochures from cruise lines we'd never gone on. So I worked my way down. 2nd drawer, 3rd drawer. By the time I got to the bottom drawer, my back was hurting and I'd already started feeling something I couldn't quite name. Like the way you feel when you walk into a room and forget why you went in there. Except worse, because it wasn't forgetting. It was that the room was the wrong room. The bottom drawer was tax returns. Howard kept everything. He had returns going back to 1979, when we'd just gotten married and he was working as a regional sales manager for a tractor supply company. I started pulling them out, one by one, looking for anything that wasn't a tax return. In the 2008 folder, I found it. The deed to our house, the house on Linden Court that we bought in 1984 when I was pregnant with Tessa, the house where all 3 of my children had taken their first steps. I unfolded it on top of the filing cabinet and held it under the lamp because my eyes aren't what they used to be. The deed was only in Howard's name. Just his name, Howard W. Dempsey. No and wife. No joint tenants. Just him. Like I had never existed in that house at all. I sat down on the floor of his office and I held that piece of paper in my lap and I tried to remember the closing. I tried to remember signing things, and I could. I could remember the lawyer with the very small hands. I could remember Howard joking that we should celebrate with the cheapest champagne we could find. I could remember signing my name. I had signed my name. I knew I had. But the deed didn't have my name on it. I turned it over because I didn't know what else to do. And that's when I saw the handwriting. 3 words in blue ink, slanted to the right the way Tessa always wrote. The way she'd written notes on her homework when she was 11 years old. Mom doesn't know. I read it 4 times before I understood what I was looking at. And then I stood up too fast, and the room tilted, and I had to put my hand on the wall to keep from falling. I called Tessa first. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted her to deny it. Maybe because I wanted to give her the chance to be innocent before I had to know she wasn't. "Hey, Mom!" She sounded distracted. I could hear a microwave in the background. "Honey, can you come over today?" "Today? I have papers to grade. Is everything okay?" "I found something in your father's office." There was a long pause. Long enough that I knew. I knew before she said a word. I knew because of how long she didn't say anything. "What did you find?" "The deed to the house." She didn't say anything. "Tessa." "I'm here." "Why does it have your handwriting on the back of it?" I heard her exhale. And then I heard her say, very quietly, "I'll come over after work." She hung up before I could answer. I called Anson next. He's the lawyer. He answered on the second ring. Professional voice, the voice he uses with clients. "Mom, hi. Everything okay? Did you know your father changed the deed?" The silence was shorter this time, but somehow worse. Because Anson didn't pretend to be confused. He didn't ask me what I meant. He just said, "Mom, can this wait until I get there tonight?" I didn't call Wesley. I couldn't make myself dial his number. I sat in Howard's office chair, the leather one that still had the imprint of his body in it, and I looked at the deed and I tried to think. We bought the house in 1984. Howard would have been 36. I would have been 29. I was pregnant with Tessa, due in March. I remembered being so big I couldn't sit comfortably in the lawyer's chairs. I remembered the lawyer had a glass jar of butterscotch candies on his desk, and I ate 3 of them while we signed papers. But the deed in my hands was dated November 14th, 2008, not 1984. Tessa would have been 25 in 2008. Anson would have been 28. Wesley would have been 14. I sat there in Howard's chair for 2 more hours, and I tried to remember what had happened in November of 2008. Howard had been 60. He'd had a small heart scare that summer, nothing serious, but the doctor had told him to slow down. I'd been teaching, I remembered. I'd been teaching 4th grade by then. I'd had a parent-teacher conference week that November. I remembered because one of my students' fathers had cried in my classroom about his daughter not being able to read. I didn't remember signing any deed. I didn't remember Howard mentioning anything about the house. I didn't remember anything. Tessa came at 5:30. She had her hair up in the messy bun she always did when she was stressed, and she had a tin of muffins in her hands, like she was visiting a neighbor. She set them on the counter and she didn't take her coat off. "Where's Anson?" I asked. "He's coming. He's driving up from Charlotte. He won't be here till 7. "Okay." "Mom, I want to wait for your brother." She nodded. She looked like she was going to cry, but she was holding it back, the same way she'd held it back at her father's funeral. Tessa never let herself cry in front of me. She thought it would hurt me. She didn't understand that her not crying was what hurt me. We sat in the living room for 90 minutes and we didn't talk. She tried, twice. Once she said, "How are you sleeping?" And I just looked at her. The other time she said, "I made the blueberry kind, about the muffins." And I said, "I'm not hungry." Anson came at 7:15. He'd driven faster than he should have. He was wearing his work clothes and his tie was loosened, and he looked like a man going to a funeral, which I suppose he was. The funeral of something. I had set the deed on the coffee table, face up, so they could see Howard's name, and then turned over so they could see Tessa's writing. Anson sat down on the couch across from me. Tessa sat next to him. Neither of them touched the muffins. I want one of you to tell me what this is, I said. Anson took a breath. He's always been the one who handles hard conversations. Even when he was 12, and he was the one who had to tell me that the dog had been hit by a car. He has that way about him, Mom. In 2008, Dad had that heart thing, and he got scared about what would happen if something happened to him. He came to me, I was just out of law school, and he asked me about estate planning. He asked you, he asked me. He didn't ask me. No, I waited. He told me he wanted to make sure the house went to a specific person if he died. Not through probate, not through the will. He wanted it to be in his name alone so he could pass it however he wanted. I looked at Tessa. She was looking at her hands. Who, Anson? Mom. Who was he leaving the house to? Anson looked at his sister. Tessa looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she still wasn't crying. Her name is Marisol. I didn't say anything. She lives in Wilmington. She's 54 years old. I didn't say anything. Dad met her in 1991, at a conference. Mom, I'm sorry. I want you to know something. In that moment, sitting on my own couch, in my own living room, looking at my two oldest children, I felt the strangest thing. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel grief. I felt something closer to relief. Like a question I'd been carrying for 33 years had finally been answered, because there had been moments, phone calls he'd taken in the garage, business trips that didn't quite add up, a receipt for a hotel in Wilmington in 2002 that I'd found in his suit pocket and never asked about because I didn't want to know. I'd known. Some part of me had always known. And the worst part of being told the truth was finding out I'd been lying to myself for 33 years. How long have you two known? I said. Anson swallowed. I've known since 2008, when he came to me about the deed. You were 28 years old. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Mom, he was my father. I am your mother. He didn't have anything to say to that. I looked at Tessa. How long have you known? 2015, she whispered. Anson told me. I made him tell me. I knew something was wrong and I made him tell me. And you didn't tell me. Mom, what was I supposed to do? You were happy. You were. I was not happy. You seemed. I was not happy, Tessa. I was making it work. There is a difference. And you, both of you, you let me make it work for a man who was going to leave our house to another woman. Anson said, Mom, the house isn't going to her. I looked at him. The house was going to her, in the original arrangement, but Dad changed it. In 2019, he changed it. Yes. To who? Anson looked at Tessa. Tessa looked at the floor. To Wesley, she said. I put my hand over my mouth. I had to, because I made a sound that I had never made before in my life, and I didn't want to hear it. Wesley, my baby. The one who'd called me every Sunday for 10 years. The one who'd flown in from Denver 3 times to sit with his father in the hospital. The one who'd held my hand at the funeral and whispered, I've got you, Mama, when they lowered the casket. Wesley knew. Mom, Wesley knew. Yes. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with it until the room got dark and neither of my children turned on a lamp. We just sat there in the dark while I tried to understand what had happened to my life. Eventually, I said, why? Anson said, Mom, Dad and Marisol, they had a son. Together. In 1992, the clock on the mantle ticked. His name is Daniel. He's 33. He has cerebral palsy. He's never been able to work. Marisol has taken care of him her whole life. Dad, Dad helped them financially for a long time, and when he got sick, he wanted to make sure Daniel was taken care of. The house was supposed to fund the trust for Daniel after you. He stopped. After I died, I said. Mom, after I died, the house was going to be sold and the money was going to go to your father's other son, whom none of you told me about, for 33 years. In 2019, he changed it. To Wesley. To Wesley. Because Wesley is the one who said he'd take care of it. Wesley said he'd inherit the house and he'd manage the trust for Daniel. After you're gone. After I'm gone. Mom, get out! Anson said, Mom, I want both of you to get out of my house. Tessa started crying. Finally. 41 years old and crying like a child, both hands over her face. Anson reached for her shoulder and she shrugged him off. Mom, please, out. They left. Anson tried to say something on the porch and I shut the door before he could finish. I locked the deadbolt. I stood with my back against the door until I heard their cars start, and then I slid down to the floor and I sat on the hardwood of my own foyer in the dark, and I stayed there for a long time. I want to tell you that I cried, but I didn't. Not that night. I called Wesley the next morning. I called him at 6 a.m. Denver time, which was 8 a.m. for me, and I knew I was waking him up and I didn't care. He answered groggy, Mama, did you know? I heard him sit up. I heard the rustle of sheets. Mama, did you know about Marisol? About Daniel? About the house? He didn't answer right away. And in the not answering, I knew. I knew the way I'd known about Tessa. How long, Wesley? Mama. How long? Since 2019. 6 years. Mama, please. Please let me explain. Did your father ask you to take the house? To manage the money for that boy? Yes. And you said yes. He's my brother, Mama. I have a brother. Daniel is my brother. He can't take care of himself. Dad was scared. He was scared he was going to die and there'd be no one. Marisol is 64 years old. She's got nobody. You couldn't tell me. Dad said he'd tell you. He said he was going to tell you. He kept saying he would, and then he didn't, and then he was sick, and then he was gone, and you had 6 years, Wesley. Mama, you sat at my kitchen table for 6 years. I am so sorry. You held my hand at his funeral. Mama, I love you. I hung up. He called back. I let it ring. He called back again, and again. By noon, he'd called 14 times. I unplugged the phone from the wall, and I went into the backyard, and I sat in Howard's metal patio chair, the one with the rust on the armrest, and I drank a glass of iced tea, and I looked at the dogwood tree he'd planted the year Tessa was born. I thought about that boy. Daniel, 33 years old. He'd been on this earth as long as Tessa had been a teacher. He'd been born when Wesley was an infant. Howard had been driving to see him while I was changing Wesley's diapers and singing him to sleep. I tried to hate him. Daniel, I tried very hard, but what I kept thinking was that none of it was his fault. He hadn't asked for any of it. He'd just been born, the same way my children had just been born, and someone, his mother, had taken care of him because that's what you do. It was Howard I hated. It was Howard who had built 2 families on the back of one woman's trust. It was Howard who had asked our son to keep his secret. It was Howard who had put his name alone on a deed in a house I had vacuumed 3 times a week for 41 years. But Howard was dead, and you cannot make a dead man answer for what he did. I called a lawyer the next week, not Anson's firm, a woman in Greensboro recommended by my friend from book club. Her name was Coraline, and she was 62, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She read the deed. She read Howard's will. She read everything I brought her, which was a manila envelope full of documents I'd found in his office. She took her glasses off. She rubbed her eyes. How long were you married? 43 years. And you contributed to the household financially? I worked for 31 years. Where? Public school. 4th grade, the same school district. Did your paychecks go into a joint account? Yes. Did mortgage payments come out of that account? Every month for 30 years. She put her glasses back on. She looked at me over the top of them. Mrs. Dempsey, North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. There is a legal doctrine called equitable interest. The house may be in your husband's name, but you have a claim. A strong one. The fact that he tried to leave it to a third party in his will it's not nothing, but it's also not the end of the story. What do I do? You let me write some letters. She wrote some letters. She wrote them to my son Wesley. She wrote them to Marisol in Wilmington. She wrote them to Howard's attorney. Wesley called me sobbing the day he got the letter. I let him talk. He said he'd never wanted the house. He said his father had pressured him. He said he'd been 26 years old when his father pulled him aside at Christmas and said, "Son, I need to ask you something." And what was he supposed to do? I let him talk himself out. And then I said, "Wesley, I am not asking you to choose between me and that boy. Do you understand? I am not asking you to abandon your brother. He is your brother. He didn't do anything wrong. But you need to understand what you did to me. You need to understand the difference between protecting your brother and lying to your mother." He cried. I didn't. In the end, Wesley signed over his interest in the house to me. He didn't have to. He could have fought me. He could have followed his father's instructions to the letter. But he did the one thing his father never did, which was choose me. Coraline negotiated with Marisol. We sat down once, the two of us, in a coffee shop in Wilmington. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back tight. She had her son with her in a wheelchair. Daniel. He looked like Howard. I want you to know that. He looked exactly like Howard. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. He smiled at me when I came in, and he said hi in a voice that took a long time to come out, and I said hi back, and I sat down and I cried for the first time in 3 weeks. Right there in a coffee shop in Wilmington in front of a stranger who had spent 33 years being the secret of my marriage. Marisol said, "I never wanted any of this." I said, "I know." She said, "He told me he was going to leave her. For 30 years he told me." I stopped believing him by the time Daniel was 10. I said, "I know that too. I didn't take everything from her. I could have." Coraline said I had the legal standing to, but I didn't. I kept the house. The house is mine. I had earned it 3 times over, but there were some accounts of Howard's, accounts I'd never known about, that he'd been using to fund Daniel's care. I let those keep flowing to Marisol. I didn't touch them. I'm not telling you this because I want you to think I'm a good person. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that being a good person and being a stupid person are not the same thing, and for 43 years I confused them, and I'm not going to confuse them anymore. It's been 1.5 years now since I found that deed. I sold Howard's office furniture. All of it. The leather chair, the bookshelves, the desk with the green blotter. I had the walls painted yellow, and I put a sewing machine in there because I used to sew before I had children, and I'd forgotten how much I liked it. Anson and I are speaking again. Slowly. He drove up last month, and we had lunch on the porch, and he apologized again, the 3rd time. And this time, I told him I forgave him because he is my son, and I cannot carry that weight forever. But forgiveness is not forgetting. He knows that. He understands that something between us is permanently different, and I think the grief of that is its own kind of punishment for him. Tessa is harder. Tessa knew the longest of my 2 older children. Tessa held my hand at her father's funeral and lied to me with her whole body. We are working on it. I don't know if we will get all the way back. I hope we will. I am 68 years old now, And I would rather have my daughter in my life than have my anger. Wesley calls every Sunday like he used to. I told him I want to meet Daniel again, properly this time, on my terms, not in a coffee shop. He's going to bring him here in the spring. I'm going to make a roast. I don't know what I'll say to him, but he is, in a strange way, my children's brother, and I have lived long enough to know that family is something you decide, not something you inherit. I still live in the house on Linden Court. The deed is in my name now. Just mine. I had it changed. The lawyer said I could put a beneficiary on it, decide who it goes to when I'm gone, and I told her I'd think about it. I'm still thinking. What I know is this. They erased my name from a piece of paper in 2008. They kept me out of a conversation that lasted 33 years. They let me feed them and bathe them and drive them to dentist appointments and bury their father. And the whole time, they were holding a secret in their mouths like a stone. But you cannot erase a woman who built the house. You can take her name off the deed. You cannot take her hands off the walls. I bake bread on Tuesdays now. I started a little garden in the backyard, tomatoes and basil and 3 rows of zinnias, because Howard hated zinnias and called them ugly, and I am 68 years old, and I will grow whatever flower I please. I joined a quilting group at the library. I drive out to the coast every other month and stay in a cheap motel and walk on the beach by myself and eat fried fish out of a paper basket. Last week, I was at the grocery store, and a woman my age was crying in the produce aisle, just standing there with a bag of oranges in her hand, tears running down her face. I didn't ask her what was wrong. I just stood next to her for a minute, and then I said, "Whatever it is, you're going to be all right. You don't believe me yet, but you will." She looked at me, and she said, "How do you know?" And I said, "Because I am." I've been thinking a lot lately about how a thing like this gets built. A secret that big doesn't appear overnight. It doesn't drop out of the sky. It gets constructed, brick, by people who keep choosing the easier thing over the right thing. Howard made the first choice in 1991. Anson made his in 2008, when he was 28 years old, and his father pulled him into a law office and asked him to keep quiet. Tessa made hers in 2015. Wesley made his in 2019. Every single one of them had a moment where they could have told me the truth, and every single one of them decided that protecting the next person up the chain was more important than protecting me. That's how betrayal actually works. It isn't one big lie. It's 1,000 small silences. What I've learned, and I'm still learning it, is that being kind and being honest are not the same thing. I spent 43 years being kind. I cooked the meals and showed up to the recitals and forgave the long business trips and the strange phone calls in the garage, and I called all of that being a good wife. But I wasn't being a good wife. I was being a quiet one. There is a difference between loving someone and being afraid to lose them, and I confused those two things for most of my adult life. You cannot build a real marriage on the foundation of one person pretending not to see what's right in front of her. I think about Daniel sometimes. That boy in the wheelchair in the Wilmington coffee shop. I don't blame him. I never could. He didn't ask to be anyone's secret. What I do think about is how Marisol raised him alone for 33 years because Howard never had the courage to do the harder, truer thing, which would have been to choose. Cowardice has a cost, and other people always pay it. That's the rule. The person who can't face the truth never suffers as much as the people who get lied to about it. If you are watching this and you are 60 years old and you are wondering whether it's too late to start asking hard questions, I want you to hear me. It isn't too late. I am 68. I learned to use a sewing machine again this year. I planted zinnias in a yard where I was told they were ugly. I sat across from a woman who had been my husband's other life, and I did not break because I had already survived the worst thing, which was finding out. Strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is what you do after the pain shows up. And wisdom, real wisdom, is the moment you finally understand that the people who love you should never need you to be smaller in order to keep loving you. I will not be smaller anymore. Not for anyone. And neither should you.